So I'm going to describe to you what an average day looks like working in New York City media. But before that, there was a really interesting clip I found of Donald Trump talking to the anchor of CBS in 1999, where he actually says, when he was thinking about running for the Reform Party, and the anchor of CBS at the time, Dan Rather, I believe it was, Dan Rather asks Donald Trump in 1999 about the Reform Party, well, what about John McCain? John McCain's thinking about running for the Reform Party. Won't he have a lot of popularity given that he's a war hero? And Donald Trump, in this 1999 interview, responds to Dan Rather to his face, war hero. He was caught. He was shot down. What kind of war hero gets shot down? Interesting, right? Donald Trump had that line for over a decade about John McCain not being a war hero because he was shot down. So on some level, when he said it during the 2016 presidential race, he already knew it would work. It had already gotten a pass from the press. In some ways, he had, tested that line decades before and nobody knew about it. Something to think about. Anyway, so what does a normal day look like working in media? Well, for most people working in media, your day usually starts around 9, or if you're working at a super liberal digital media company, it's going to start around 10, and you'll come in 9 a.m., 10 a.m. First things most people do is they check Slack, they check their email, and they check Twitter. Those are the kind of big three. There'll always be some conversations going on in Slack and the various Slack channels about like what's happening in the news, what stories you're working on, what stories the other desks are working on, what meetings are scheduled for the day. And of course, everybody will be checking Twitter or looking at Twitter, seeing what's trending, seeing what's trending in New York City, what's trending in LA, what's trending globally, and then tweeting themselves because journalists love to tweet throughout their working day. So that's kind of the first thing everybody does in the morning is, email, Slack, Twitter. Then usually there's kind of a meeting. That's been my experience anywhere I've worked. There's kind of a morning meeting, so to speak, where people kind of discuss what they're working on, what the agenda is for the week or for the month, how the numbers are roughly, like what are the concurrents been? Concurrents meaning like what has been the average total number of people on the site at any given time? What were the big articles of the day, of the week? Maybe some pitches will come up during that time, like, hey, I was thinking about working on this story. So they'll usually have a meeting. That'll usually be the first thing, whether 9 or 10 a.m. in the morning. After that, then the day becomes kind of a mixture of like short form content and long form content. Often, any sort of media job, part of it will involve shifting gears very often between covering what's breaking news, maybe whether it's financial, the market's changed, or Donald Trump has tweeted something, or somebody's gotten arrested, whatever it may be, and there might be something coming down the AP wire or on Twitter that becomes suddenly newsworthy, and it's suddenly, hey, write a post up or quickly publish this on Twitter, or find a headline and a photo, and we're gonna run it on Facebook, whatever it may be. And so it's shifting with the daily breaking news. Often kind of keeping one hand on that pulse and ready to like hop on any piece of content that's demanded for that. And then the other half of your day is spent slowly chipping away at longer form projects, whether that's a story you're currently writing and working on with your editor, or it's reviewing transcripts of an interview, and kind of finding out the thoughts that you want, thoughts that just sound on tape. And that can range from anything from like the interview that you filmed on a camera or just a tape recorder, or even figuring out thoughts you want from other media companies to compile into this larger story you're building. And that will take up also, a large part of your day. So it's shifting between like looking on a longer form project that either you've pitched and you think will do well, or that's been assigned to you by your editor, and then kind of keeping Slack and Twitter open to deal with the news of the day and making content that kind of pays the bills. Now you might think, well, where are these offices? Most of them are in Manhattan. Most of them are the classic offices you think of in movies. You go in this random, tall building through a side door. You open up through the door. There's some doorman-esque thing with some security clearance. You think. You bing, 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 to quote Donald Trump. You go up the elevators and up to the elevators to the floor. And there's usually whatever division of the company you're working on. Another part of the day is often lunch. A lot of news companies nowadays have kind of shifted to providing lunch for their employees. I think because it's actually been shown to increase productivity, because when they have everybody, on a max exodus at 11 a.m. or noon or 1 p.m. leaving for an hour for lunch, no work gets done, and it's actually more cost effective to buy lunch for their employees and keep them in the office as drones working away. So often the lunch will be provided for you. There's usually free coffee and snacks. That's a pretty common. And then lastly, it'll be filling out deadlines, filling out paperwork that you need to do. If you have a deadline that day on some sort of breaking news thing, making sure you get that off to the editor or the curator, or get that published. Or if you have a longer piece, making sure that's going in a forward trajectory and kind of hitting the deadlines for that. There is a relatively large collaborative element to journalism that I don't think most people understand unless they get into the field. That you'll see a byline for something, or you'll see a video produced by X or Y, but really what happens behind the scenes is everybody's working, especially in news media. It's all open desk format. There's no cubicles. That's not really a thing. There's not even really offices anymore. It's not like so-and-so's got their office up in the thing smoking the cigars. Everybody's open desk. Most of the editor-in-chiefs or editor-in-large or assignment editors to your intern is all sitting on open desks. If you want to throw a paper airplane to the editor-in-chief, totally can. Yeah, that's just kind of how it is. But because of that, it leads to a pretty collaborative environment, actually, where most stories, are worked on with other people. You're kind of turning to your person beside you, like, hey, what do you think of this paragraph? Or what do you think of this, how this sounds? Or what do you think of this shot or this video or this edit? What would you add here? And somebody hops on and does this, and, or like, hey, can you read this and throw it in a Google Doc? It's a lot of, sending files back and forth on Slack. It's much more collaborative than the kind of lone journalist out there telling the story. It's generally not how it works. Now, there's some hierarchical things. Let's say there's an editor at large. An editor at large means they relatively have freedom to cover any sort of story they want within the news organization. So an editor at large might interview somebody and then not have time because they need to get on a plane to go do something else. They'll throw that interview, transcription to somebody else. Somebody else will transcribe it, Slack the person back. So here's the transcription, and they'll, go back and forth on it a little bit. But journalism, by and large, is actually, I think, more collaborative than people think. It's also not as travel glorious as people think either. Most media press jobs, you're not flying down to DC with a notebook and a tape recorder and you're sitting in some bar interviewing some fancy politician. That's really not it for 90% of your working day and your working year, I should say, or 90% of reporters. Most reporters operate entirely in an office using kind of AP, like Associated Press or Reuters, The Wires, Twitter, and kind of collecting the stories either, from those resources or phone interviews or trying to bring people into the office. Anyway, that's just kind of a standard, I think, day. Starting from when you walk in the morning and you kind of check in Slack, Twitter, and email, you have your morning meeting, and then the first half of the day is kind of focused on the breaking news, covering little short stories, and the second half of the day is usually focused on working on larger projects. Nonetheless, throughout it, you're working relatively closely with many, many different people in media, partly due to the way companies are structured in the sense of this is open desk format, and often you need many different people to get any sort of projects done. Hopefully you found that kind of interesting. If you did, leave a comment. If you want to watch another video, click around. Thank you as always, guys, for watching. I'll see you guys tomorrow.